I don't advocate living an uncomfortable life. Oftentimes people see the title of my book and, as you said, it's called Hunting Discomfort. And I'm like, Sterling, look at my bank account, look at my business, look at my relationships. I don't need to hunt discomfort, and I'm surrounded by it. And my answer is always the same. Oh, you're not hunting discomfort. You're living with it. The more that you deny, avoid, or survive discomfort, the more we're sentenced to dealing with it. We end up living a much more uncomfortable life if we refuse to deal with it. I think deep down, we know the things that we've been avoiding. And oftentimes it's just sitting down and taking a quiet moment for ourselves and self-reflection or meditation or journaling or mindfulness and asking that question. What is it that I know deep down I need to be doing? And I think that compass that's inside of us is one that is sometimes hard to listen to, but it's the most important one in our lives.
Sterling, thanks so much for being here today.
Lee, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, doing some research around you. You have some interesting hobbies, diving with great white sharks, skydiving. What got you interested in those kinds of things?
Well, I've had some low points in not just my career, but my life. And in one of those low points, I started to really dig deep into myself and into research and into talking to people to really understand how I could grow as a human being, because I believe that as we grow as individuals, it translates into business. And what I found was fundamental to that was confronting the unknown and the uncomfortable. I think for all of us, it's stepping into the unknown. It's getting into uncomfortable things that gives us the, not just the capacity to grow, but that's inherent in growth. And so I'm not like one of these thrill seekers that's like, let me jump out of planes and dive with sharks and run across the Rocky Mountains. I don't do it because I get a high from it. I do it candidly because a lot of these things scare me. They scare me to do, train for, to talk about, to commit to. And, I believe that it's become part of my practice. Those things have become part of my practice to grow myself. Does that make any sense, or do I just sound like a crazy person?
No, I think it makes total sense. So in your book, Hunting Discomfort, which I, read cover to cover, I took so many notes. I feel like I rewrote the book with questions and notes surrounding me here. But it makes all the sense in the world. And for our listeners, what really got you on this journey, that super low point that you talk about in the book and some of your interviews?
Yeah, well, I grew up a fifth generation retailer in my family's grocery store, which was a blast when I was a kid. But then, I turned 13 and my dad put me on night crew. It was a little bit of a different story. But I had a good life, worked hard. Admittedly got somewhat lucky when right out of college, I sold my first company to this group in Silicon Valley. And we had conducted a proof of concept in my family store. I founded the company with my dad. And of course, the store was our first customer. And, when we sold it, it became part of this like Apple Pay before Apple Pay. And this is picture early 2000s. It's before the iPhone came out. Nobody was really doing biometrics in any meaningful way. There were no finger scans or face scans to get into your phone or pay for things. We were the first one. And so investors would look at what we were putting together and they'd look at the engagement we had with customers. And they said, well, this is the future. And in a way, they were right. But at the time, they threw hundreds of millions of dollars at us, multi-billion-dollar valuation. We've got 700 people, offices all over the world. It was like, have you seen that movie, Wolf of Wall Street, Lee?
I have, yeah, long time ago.
Like a scene out of that movie. Models in the office, parties at the Four Seasons, the rest I'll leave to your and everybody else's imagination. But at that time, I was sure that it's only a matter of time until we go public, cash in, and I very humbly crown myself the next Steve Jobs. But had that worked out, we'd be having a very different conversation, because when the housing market collapsed, this is like 2009, 2010, our investment dried up and the whole thing went bankrupt. $500 million of cash gone. And not only did the company collapse, but so did I. Especially as a young guy, my ego, my identity, who I believed I was, what I thought I was doing in the world was so wrapped up into the company. The company crashed, and it sent me into what do I want to say, tailspin of some of the hardest times in my life.
Yeah, I can imagine. So in that, you figured out that this discomfort that you're going through is actually a real opportunity to create some real value coming out the other side.
It was, but it wasn't an immediate realization, Lee. I spent, admittedly, years avoiding discomfort, denying it, and just like trying to buckle down and survive. And what that looked like is something that we all do, which, I had friends call me and say, Sterling, how you doing? And I would say, fine. They would say, do you want to come out to these fancy dinners and these expensive trips? And I'd say, oh yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to join you. I'm doing fine. Meanwhile, I'm depleting my whole bank account, driving myself into debt, have this deep anxiety and depression inside of me, but on the surface, pretending everything is okay. And I went on like that for a couple of years until I really bottomed out, where I'm in six figures of now personal debt, not just business debt, but personal debt. My girlfriend had broken up with me. I ended up having to move into my parents' house in my 30s, which was super humbling. And it felt like the whole world was coming down around me. And that's what it took, that rock bottom kind of moment, for me to start to have at least the beginnings of some courage and confidence to look myself in the mirror and have some of those hard conversations with myself. And I started to realize that, hey, those things that I've been avoiding, I've been denying, I've been pushing away, those are my opportunity for growth. The things that I'm trying to survive despite of are actually my path.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. One of the things I've said for a long time, and because I learned it a long time ago, is trust the struggle. And even when it's really hard, I get this sort of strange, warm feeling inside. This is going to be amazing when I come out the other side. And my biggest takeaway from your book is there's huge value in leaning into the discomfort. I think the challenge is, and I'm curious how you would answer this, is how do you get on the right track and then know you're on the right track? Because that has to be the most uncomfortable stage of this, because I believe once they get started, they'll never get off. So how do you know you're on it? How do you get on the right track so you can get to a place where, okay, I'm never going back?
Yeah. Well, first a disclaimer, Lee, like I don't advocate living in an uncomfortable life. Oftentimes people see the title of my book and, as you said, it's called Hunting Discomfort. And they're like, Sterling, look at my bank account, look at my business, look at my relationships. I don't need to hunt discomfort, and I'm surrounded by it. And my answer is always the same. Oh, you're not hunting discomfort. You're living with it. You're probably placating it. You're coming up for reasons and rationales why you have to deal with those things in your life that you'd rather not have. And the ironic part of that is the more that you deny, avoid, or survive discomfort, the more we're sentenced to dealing with it. We end up living a much more uncomfortable life if we refuse to deal with it. So that said, I think deep down, we know the things that we've been avoiding. We know the things that we want to do or need to do. And oftentimes it's just sitting down and taking a quiet moment for ourselves and self-reflection or meditation or journaling or mindfulness and asking that question. What is it that I know deep down I need to be doing, that I'm putting off, that I'm not doing, that I'm shying away from? And I think that compass that's inside of us is one that is sometimes hard to listen to, but it's the most important one in our lives.
Yeah, a couple of big questions come up out of that. And I think I see a lot of folks doing what they think they should do instead of what they know they should do, or maybe were meant, which is the intrinsic motivation piece of it. Talk about that. How do you know you're doing the right thing when you lean into being a little bit uncomfortable or a lot uncomfortable?
Yeah, so that's a great point, because oftentimes what rationally, intellectually is the right direction to go maybe isn't the right direction for you. And I'll give you a great example. About a year and a half before that company collapsed, I remember being at this executive retreat. We were down in San Diego, and I was outside with a couple of the executives, and I said, listen, this doesn't feel like we're on the right path. We've got problems with the technology. We've got problems with customers. We've got some culture problems. Like, this doesn't feel right to me. And, remember, I'm in my early mid-20s at the time, and I'm standing with people that are not only 2 to 3 times my age, but massively more experienced. They're top people at Fortune 500 companies, and they've come to lead this startup. And essentially what they say to me is, Sterling, don't worry about it. We got this. Like, you're either on the bus or you're not. And if you want to do something else, do something else. But this is what we're doing. And I remember right then and there, I betrayed my inner knowing. And I said, I must be wrong. I must be wrong. These people that are far wealthier, smarter, more experienced than I am, they must be right. And I sold myself out. Now, I'm not saying I had the right answers, but I'm saying that intuition was important. And listening to it would have had me and all of us kind of draw different conclusions about what they were to do, and possibly would have led us down a path where we could have seen some success. So I think it is a bit of a danger or a watch out or a pitfall to rationalize the direction we're going, saying, oh, well, the money makes sense, or the legal agreements airtight, or, this relationship this person promises me. Like, yeah, that all is important. I'm not saying we need to diminish those things, but I also think that listening to our inner knowing is something that guides us more than any of these things in the external possibly could.
Yeah. And from your book and the 5 sort of categories of discomfort, I put this one into facing reality, and I see it a lot in businesses. This is what they want it to be. That was part of the original idea, if not the entire original idea, but that's not what they've discovered or what we've tripped over. And I see so many go down the road of losing millions to tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, where they could have pivoted based on what the market said, but they wouldn't face reality. And then how uncomfortable it is to bring this up when nobody wants to hear it. What are your experiences, Eric? I do a lot of work with senior teams, and I think that's my job to expose reality. And boy, does it get uncomfortable for a lot of folks.
Yeah. And I think it's oftentimes, speaking from my own missteps, it's because of our ego is so tied up in our own perspective that I believe that my view of the world is the truth and not a truth. And if you question that, that feels like you're questioning me, who I am at my core. And I think it's really, you said this word trust earlier, and that's been something I've been thinking a lot about lately, because it's a trust that there is something greater for ourselves, for our organization, for our team, for our communities in the world, that gives us the ability to let go of how we've defined ourselves, how we've defined each other, the market, or even the world, to kind of transcend the knowledge of the past to grow into new potential. And it is hard. That's why I think, like, those uncomfortable conversations, whenever we feel discomfort, I think that's like a big glowing neon sign saying, hey, right here's an opportunity. There's an unknown about myself, or there's unknown about something in the world. And yes, it feels uncomfortable, but if I'm willing to go through those things, experience those things, open my mind to new ideas and soften my heart to some of those feelings, that I'm going to be able to grow in new and meaningful ways.
Yeah, I like to think of those, the way you're describing it, as these alignment, improving value creation conversations. And for me, they're the first ones that I want to walk into, because, wow, addressing this is going to have a huge impact, going forward. And you're talking about uncertainty, which is another one of these categories. how can we be comfortable with that and with uncertainty?
Yeah. Well, there's not an easy answer to that, but I think we've almost traded our necessity of dealing with the unknown for all the prediction that happens in the world. You know, I can wake up in the morning and I can see the weather prediction and stock prediction and stock or a traffic prediction, like all the things tell me how the world are going to be. And I think that gets us away from this fundamental human reality, which is tomorrow is not promised to any of us at any level. We cannot and we will not know exactly what will come even in this next second, not to mention the next day, next month, or next year. And I'm all for prediction. I'm all for risk mitigation, especially if you talk to my financial team. It's necessary. We need those things in place. But I don't think that we can totally rely on prediction versus coming to terms with the unknown ourselves. And when we can come to terms with that, we can surrender to the finitude of our life and everything that we're bringing forward. I think it gives us a capacity, again, to be able to grow and trust that there's something greater for us on the other side. It doesn't have to be manipulated. It doesn't have to be forced, but we can open into it.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to being uncomfortable, and this is, I run CEO mastermind groups as part of my business. And one of the topics that came up in the last month with several of the groups was, how do we get more comfortable being uncomfortable and raise that band and be good? Like this is really, really good. So is it mindset, perspective? How can our listeners think about that more effectively?
Yeah. Well, I came across a study from the University of Michigan, and they were studying discomfort in all its flavors. You know, physical discomfort, like you stubbed your toe, emotional discomfort, maybe you lost a big deal you're working on, or having a really tough conversation with a coworker or even spouse or loved one. And they found that whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, the brain and body process that discomfort almost identically. So much so you can take acetaminophen, Tylenol, and it will help you with emotional pain. Now, all the disclaimers about that. I'm not a doctor. That's not a biohack. I don't suggest anybody do that. But what I do suggest is that we can take that next step, which is if where we meet discomfort is the same anywhere, we can grow our capacity to deal with it everywhere. It's a muscle we can build. You know, if we want to build our muscles, we go to the gym. If we want to grow our resilience, our ability to create breakthrough growth and breakthrough value creation, if we want to grow our capacity to deal with the unknown and uncomfortable, we hunt discomfort no matter what form it's in. And the cool thing that I realized is that this is now a research out of Yale, that when we are uncomfortable, that means your heart is racing, adrenaline's coursing through your veins, your palms get a little sweaty, like whatever those physical symptoms are for you. When we lean into it, we can learn up to 4 times faster. Discomfort is not something to avoid. It's quite literally a biohack for making us better, faster, and smarter, but we've got to lean into it. And the good news is we get much better at it over time.
Yeah. And what's leaning too far and not leaning enough? And again, how do you find your sweet spot in there? Because it can't be about getting up and being as uncomfortable as possible all day and then going to bed. Yes, I won.
Right. Yeah. Well, I can speak to that firsthand because I'm one of the many that would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. Like public speaking was terrifying to me, especially after this big business failure that I had. And getting up in front of anybody, not to mention a conversation like this, would have left me incapacitated, literally not able to get words out of my mouth. Too much discomfort. Now, on the other hand, many of us now have this luxury of modernity where we can sit on the couch and work on Zoom and be entertained on Netflix and have Uber Eats deliver food at my apartment. I really don't have to do much of anything. I don't have to leave my place at all. Too much comfort. if those are both ends of the spectrum, it's kind of a bell curve, a sweet spot in the middle where, yeah, we're uncomfortable. It's probably more than we think we can deal with. But when we are feeling so much discomfort that's not incapacitating us, but we can still function, that's usually about the sweet spot. And, two important things about that, you mentioned this already, is it's different for everybody, and that spot will change over time.
Mm. Okay. Well, you reference this a few times in the book, but my version of it is you actually have to do the work, not just talk about the work. And it goes into the category of, why are so many people so great at telling other people how to do it? They can't do that thing to save themselves. And I see a lot of experts on stages that couldn't do the job they're talking about to save themselves. So for me, it's important that I'm leaning in, doing the work that I'm talking about, and I get better questions. I discover stuff. But the others, I feel like it's a strange form of virtue signaling in a way.
Yeah.
I know what's best for the world, but I can't do any of it. Talk about the importance of doing the work, and how do you think about doing this work, for our listeners?
Yeah, it's kind of like sitting on the sidelines of a sports game. Let's just say a basketball game. If you know anything about the sport, it's really easy to be like, oh, well, this player should have done that, and this is a better move, and can you believe they made that mistake? But being on the court and doing it is a totally different thing. And to me, this is actually one of my pet peeves, Lee, is that the words we share, we preach, match actions. And I think finding the disconnect between those things, or the gaps between the things we say and preach and the ways that we think and be and act, is a sweet spot for being able to grow. And I know you said you do a lot of work with executive teams, as do I. And so you probably see the same thing, which is they've got these incredible values posted up on the wall. A marketing firm or a PR agency has created these values like honesty and integrity and serve the customer. And they sound beautiful. But as soon as you sit down in a meeting and you start talking about their growth or a new product launch or hiring new people, it's almost like those values don't even exist. It's just wallpaper. And so, I think if you've got values declared, fantastic. Whether they're up on the wall or you know them in your head, I think, as you're saying, that work is bringing those values into life, taking them into our heart, transcending the intellect, and really becoming those things, acting those things. And if you don't have values already articulated or posted up somewhere, that's a really good place to start. What are the values that are important to me? And what are the ways that I may be acting out of alignment with those things, and bring them in a little bit? All of that, too, is uncomfortable, by the way, right?
Yeah, well, figuring that out. I mean, I've always described it as expensive wallpaper as well. And for the biggest companies on the planet, where senior leaders talk about their 12 values and everything else, they don't even know what they are. And even if they can recite half of them, they don't know what it means to live them, to connect that to creating more value. So in a way, that's another form of what I would call business virtue signaling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think those values, on one hand, they can seem superficial, like, oh, I'm a good person. I'm living true to my values. Okay, maybe. But on the other, I think those values are incredibly important, because they are the only guiding lights as we step into the unknown. Because the unknown it's just inherently unknowable, right? Like we were saying, we cannot know exactly what's coming next. And we cannot pin ourselves to anything finite, knowing exactly what the stock price is going to be, or exactly how somebody's going to respond to a sales presentation. We cannot pin ourselves to those finite things and be able to grow. It's only when we use the guidelights, the guideposts of values, of things like love, joy, gratitude, and peace, the things that no matter what happens in the world can never be taken away from us, can we successfully navigate the unknown in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I agree. I love them as these alignment tools, or as a decision-making filter going through.
Yeah.
from which we create value as an organization, from which we cultivate our capabilities of being a better human or whatever that means for each of us, which is going to be so different in there. And, most companies that I work with, they don't even have a defined purpose for one of the alignment tools, i.e., hey, we're going to have a mission statement, but before we develop it, we want to make sure that it does this, like it creates this value or set of values or behaviors, which I'm more a fan of than actual values. What do you find in there? It's the process of coming up with it instead of a marketing slogan. What's something that's going to create real value? What do you find?
Totally. Yeah, 100% agree. I just am in the middle of doing some work with a big Fortune 500 kind of company. And they're launching new values. And what they did is they created this great presentation, looks really beautiful. And they unveiled it on a virtual meeting with all of their teams. And they said, oh, here's our new values. And, little descriptors explaining what each of them was. Now, great. They read great. They look great. They present great to Wall Street. Nobody's going to look at those things and be like, those are a mistake, or those are bad, or those are wrong. Everybody says like, oh, yeah, they're great. But they're missing this fundamental buy-in of why those things matter, period, and why those things matter to each of us as individuals. As we can create values or behaviors as a group, or at least create buy-in together, that kind of takes those things from the intellectual level and brings them forward through us in the ways that we actually behave and actually act. Telling somebody that they should have integrity and be nice and be honest and treat the customer well, like those are kind of like, well, no, duh. Of course we should do those things. But taking the time to go through the process of unearthing why those things are important to each of us is how they're not only posted up in the wall, but live true within the organization and everybody that works there.
Yeah. And I love the way you said, do it together, whether it's 10 employees, 10,000 or more. I always survey everybody. Like, what are the one behaviors the best you ever worked with on their best days? And you end up distilling that out with a set of values or behaviors that everybody participated in or had a choice to, at least, right? They can't say that they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the same goes for the mission and purpose. Our mission is to fill in the blank. Well, great. But why does that matter to your team? And how does that align with each of your team members' purpose in life? This might be a little existential, but I feel like it fits with you in this conversation, Lee, of like, I think each of us has a purpose. We have a calling. There's something that we're here on this planet in our human experience to do. And being able to one, orient ourselves to what that is, and two, connect that to what we're doing in our business, I think is hugely important. Not just to produce results, the money and the business growth, but human fulfillment comes out of that as well.
Yeah. The way I think about it, and I haven't started 50 companies like your background is amazing, but this is my 7th company.
I haven't started 50 either, but I've been involved with a number of them. Yeah.
So I'm on my 7th company I've started from scratch, and
nice.
And the biggest exit well into 9 figures down to a few $1 million. So I've done well. But I always thought about it, and it evolved. I couldn't even articulate it early on. It needs to be a holistic value creation. And so when people say it's not just about the money, then when you look under the covers, well, wait a minute, it's pretty much 90+% about the money for these people that say that. But I look at emotional energy value creation as a superpower for leaders and building intrinsic productive, motivation with the team, within the team.
Yeah.
And the spiritual value creation, the connectedness piece, how are we supporting each other, being there, all the stuff that we do. And, one of my businesses, 500 plus employees, if somebody said, hey, let's do this adventure race, there's 300 plus blue t-shirts showing up a month later to do it. So intentionally doing all three made the money bigger. We beat our competitors globally. Like all of it, but I feel like today it's way more virtue signaling than practicing real holistic value. What's
Yeah.
your take on this, and how does this land on you?
Yeah, totally. I think the language of values and virtues and growth is so prevalent now. It's posted all over Instagram and people are talking about it on YouTube. Like you just see the language everywhere. And it's far too easy to just parrot that language. Just take the words and don't embody it, but just say it because it sounds good and it sounds right. And it might be, but it's of no value to us unless we can practice that in our everyday life. I'm kind of a nerd about some of these things, and I got into some of German American philosopher and theologian Paul Tillich's work. And he was saying there are two fundamental human concerns that we have, two kinds of things that humans are preoccupied with. One are finite things, opening a number of locations, earning a certain amount of money, selling a certain amount of deals, making a certain number of phone calls, finite things that will either happen or not. And he says, as human beings, we spend almost all of our time on this, and they're somewhat irrelevant, at least at the end of the day, or maybe better said, at the end of our life. What actually matters to human beings are infinite concerns. Again, the things we've been talking about: love, joy, courage, gratitude, peace. No matter what happens in the finite world, that can never be taken away from us. And I've found, this is saying the same thing that you said in different language, but as we can bring those infinite things into the finite moments, the love into a really difficult conversation, the gratitude into maybe a business loss, the courage into sharing difficult news with a customer, that's what actually transforms everything standing in our way. And that's where we find not only the hard business results of value creation and money, but fulfillment and energy and all the buckets of value creation you're talking about here. It all exists in the same place.
Yeah. So you're touching on something that's helping me think more deeply about helping listeners, myself, and others solidify their purpose in the world, because it's so big to get your head around.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like, listening to this conversation, you can just start out, well, what is it? I'll do a bunch of research. I feel like going through the intentional sort of chasing of discomfort, or hunting it, as you describe in the book. Just do that and you'll discover it over time. Like it will reveal itself. Talk about that.
Yeah, I believe purpose is emergent. Well, it's inherent within all of us. We all have a purpose. We have a mission in our lives. I think oftentimes it gets buried by limiting beliefs, by past traumas, by current circumstances, by the problems that we're experiencing. And we oftentimes, going all the way back to the beginning, just placate all of those problems. And we succumb to the rationality of a situation. And we tell ourselves like, oh, well, if I can only get by this next day or this next month or this next year, then I'll be all set. Then I can go on this journey to discover my purpose. But that next day becomes the next day. The next year becomes the next year. And all of a sudden you're 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, still telling yourselves the same thing. Coming from somebody that's done this, right? I made that mistake. By going after those uncomfortable things in our lives, reconciling the pain from our past, having the difficult but necessary conversations with ourselves, with those around us, with addressing limiting beliefs that maybe we hold really true to ourselves and maybe even identify with. As we start to go through that discomfort, then that purpose, that mission that's so intrinsic and innate inside all of us starts to emerge. And our purpose becomes forward when all the things that are in the way of it are out of the way. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And one of the things that kind of hit me like a hammer in the book was, if you don't enjoy hunting discomfort, it will hunt you. And you relax long enough and it's coming for you. Talk
Totally.
about that. It's so true, it seems.
It will. I mean, that's what happened with that massive business collapse I was part of. Where we were sweeping the problems under the rug. We weren't addressing the issues that we needed to address. There were customer problems, there was culture problems, there were team problems, there were leadership problems, which were all subservient to the amount of cash that we had. Oh, we don't need to deal with those things because we have all of this money. We'll figure it out later. Well, discomfort found us. And in that hard moment, when this whole thing fell apart, I told you I was afraid of speaking in public. And that's one of the discomforts that I went after. I said, okay, this thing that terrifies me, where I'm literally incapacitated standing in front of a crowd, I'm going to do that thing. So I started in small ways and then spoke to larger groups and then started kind of throwing my hat into the ring for larger events. And it turns out, by reconciling that discomfort within myself, coming to terms with why it made me so uncomfortable, why it was so difficult, I found that speaking is actually one of my favorite things in the world to do. The thing that I hated has become my passion. And I think that's a small microcosm of the experience I've heard from many that have really aligned with their purpose. It had something to do with the things that they didn't want to deal with at all. And by confronting those things, dealing with those things, their purpose became emergent. It's that Stoic philosophy, the obstacle is the way. Well, the obstacle is the way, but it's also the path that connects us to our purpose.
Yeah, and you talk about the way out is always through, which is exactly what you're saying here. That makes all the sense in the world to me.
Yeah. Well, I think that presence optimizes performance. Really dealing with the things that we need to deal with will always beat out speeding up and ignoring those things. I'm always an advocate of slowing down, having a values conversation, talking about the mission, reconnecting with purpose. Short term, there's a lot of resistance to that from many, including myself sometimes, by the way. It's not like I'm on top of a mountain and I figured this all out. I'm in the process myself. It seems so easy to pick up the phone call and close another deal or just get through this board meeting, whatever it is. And it's true. But if we slow down and really deal with the things that we know we need to deal with, the organization knows they need to deal with, the results will be transformative in nature and oftentimes surprising, sometimes exponential.
Yeah, that's incredible. One of the other forms of discomfort that you talk about in the book, exposure.
Yeah,
I thought that was fascinating going through that.
Well, exposure is the fear of somebody seeing you exactly how you are. The successes, oftentimes we don't worry about putting on display and posting on social media, but it's the failures, the problems, the inadequacies that we oftentimes hide, not just from the world, but sometimes even within ourselves. And it kind of culminates in this fear to be seen with all that you are and all that you're not. So we'll shy away from maybe people, we'll shy away from cultures or conversations where there's a demand or mandate to show up truly authentically. And it leaves us disconnected from those people around us. I like to talk to myself. I'm like a recovering perfectionist where I want everything to be perfect. I want to look perfect and sound perfect and be perfect and the client to be perfect and the conversation to be exactly perfect. And I found that not only is there no perfection, there's no such thing. It's an aspiration, not something that we can actually achieve. But trying to be perfect makes it impossible for us to do the work that we've got to do to be able to grow in the ways that we want to grow.
Yeah, and that's a connection. I listed everything you talk about, these common areas of exposure. One of them is trusting somebody. It could even be committing to a relationship of any kind. You're going to be exposed. You can't fake it for that long. Some people are good maybe for a long
Yeah.
time, but so that maybe these are all closet perfectionists that aren't even acknowledging it.
I think so. Evolutionarily, it makes sense, right? Like if somebody sees a problem or an error or a flaw in you, maybe you'll be excommunicated from the tribe, and that would mean not just ego death, but actually death in those early human situations, possibly. So I think it's built within us. Survival's built within each of us, but survival and growth are not the same thing. We've got to come to terms with some of those things that have us protecting ourselves, kind of having that wall between ourselves and others to be able to not just connect, but grow and innovate and do new things. And one of the things that I think was really powerful for me to realize is, I work with a lot of high performing leaders. I know you do, and I know a lot of the listeners are high performing leaders. And there's this pitfall of thinking, well, it's all about self accountability. And I think self accountability is really important. It's necessary to perform at any high level, but I think it's only reliable when we're doing something that we're already reliably doing. I go to the gym 5 or 6 days a weekly. I don't need to be accountable to you to go 5 or 6 days. I'm already doing it. But when we're stretching for growth, that fear of exposure oftentimes has us not share it with anybody. We have this goal that we want for ourselves and we're business, but we're not really going to commit to any of the things around us. Or maybe we'll tell ourselves that we're going to make this commitment to ourselves. But I'll tell you, again, speaking from personal experience, when we get into the unknown and the uncomfortable and things get hard and it feels like the world is kind of falling apart around us, self-accountability is just not enough. We need external accountability, somebody to sit down with us, to have a specific deliverable on a specific day, on a specific time. And that conversation, if you don't deliver it, can't just be like, oh, well, do it next time. It's got to be, well, why? Where was it that you missed and why did you miss? So you don't do that again, so we can improve from that. And research shows that when we have that external accountability, we're 95% more likely to achieve our goals as an individual and 4 times as likely to achieve our goals as a team.
Yeah, and then you make a good case, and I agree in the book, paraphrasing, but we can't fully acknowledge or see our completely accurate reality. But having this sort of gang that you develop around you of all these different, I guess, value-added personas and areas of expertise, et cetera, if we're open to that. I love the way you talk about that in the book. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's this necessity of humility to grow, being willing to be wrong, to look bad, to be embarrassed. Not necessarily that will happen, but a willingness to be able to go there. And it's that willingness of being humble, of letting go of your perspective, of letting go of some of those uncomfortable feelings that lets us really achieve the things that we want to achieve.
Yeah. What makes sense to me is that the whole purpose of this human existence is to elevate human consciousness, which means figuring more and more stuff out. That's my simple version. It's to figure shit out. And so the only way we grow, we go to the gym, we work out hard, we get more flexible, we get stronger. And we've gotten to this place where everybody wants to do less. There should be no struggle for the kids and now for adults and everybody. And the smaller and smaller group of folks that actually produce stuff are paying for more and more of those that don't want to struggle or do anything. How did we get there?
Yeah. Well, I think modernity has given us a lot of luxuries. It's simplified our lives, where discomfort used to be a driver of behavior. If you look back again in the caveman days, if I was cold, I had the discomfort of being cold. Well, I had better find a cave or some kind of shelter to warm up. Or if I've got the discomfort of being hungry, I've got to go out and forage or hunt to feed myself. The discomfort is driving behavior. Now, these days, it doesn't work exactly that way. And we can subvert the discomfort from driving our behavior, and we just stay mired in it. If I'm uncomfortable in a conversation, I don't have to have that conversation. My survival doesn't depend on it. I can sit on the couch and brood about it and be resentful and be angry about the whole thing. My survival has nothing to do with it. So somehow modernity has given us this, it really is a luxury to not have to have discomfort drive our behavior from a survival standpoint. But what that means is that we've all got to really be more intentional about going after some of those uncomfortable things, because that discomfort is telling you something. There's a gift in the pain. There's a present in the struggle. And as we can, again, lean into it, open it, let us, how do I want to say it? Let it unveil what it has to teach us. Then that's what's going to give us, again, the growth that we're seeking.
Yeah. Do you find that most folks need some major thing like a collapse personally or professionally to start discovering this whole process? Because without that, can they naturally get started because they just see this as a way to go? And I'm thinking back to, 6, 7 years old and my journey, and I think what got me going on this. But how do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd like to think it's not necessary, but my personal experience tells me it was, at least for me. Like, without hitting that rock bottom, I wouldn't have started this journey in anywhere near as meaningful a way. Now, I did it the hard way, I guess you could say. And it doesn't have to be that hard. Like, we can take some of this discomfort in small chunks and in small bites. Sometimes when I'm talking with audiences, I talk about like microdosing discomfort, like when you feel it, where you feel it, like just try a little bit of it, open to it just a little bit, because you get stronger every time you are. But I do fear that many people have to have some kind of rock bottom to really start to come to terms with some of these things, because the ego is just so strong. And we're so attached to our perspective and how we've defined ourselves, each other, and the world. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes it takes that world falling down before we're able to break free from it.
Well, I guess if it's not broke, why fix it, right? For a lot
That's the excuse.
Yeah. And for those that aren't going to crash personally or professionally, likely, what would be the reward for them in getting on this train track?
Yeah. Well, all the results are in the same place. Not just the business results where, you grow your organization, maybe you have the financial performance that you're looking for. But I think more importantly, in the long run, is you have the human connection that's worthwhile, that adds value to your life. And you have the purpose and meaning and fulfillment that we all crave. We all crave. I mean, I'm sure you're probably familiar with Bronnie Ware's work, who talked about the regrets of the dying. And all of the regrets, she worked with dying people for years, and she found that they all boiled up into this regret of not having the courage to live true to themselves. Not true to the market, not true to what the textbook said, not true to the best practices of how somebody's supposed to go through something, but the courage to live true to ourselves. And as we can bring that courage into our present, not wait until our deathbed until we have these regrets, but have the courage to confront the uncomfortable and the uncertain, then we can get on our path much faster and go much further. So we're left with, again, the financial performance, but also the meaning and fulfillment that we want in our lives as well.
Yeah. Well, I feel like once you get to a certain point, you're covering living expenses and there's, emergencies and all of that. All the rest of it, we would benefit greatly from pouring it into improving emotional energy and spiritual value creation, connectedness, community, all of that out there. That feels amazing to me.
Yeah.
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 The fifth category, uncertainty. So I think one of the challenges is if you're uncomfortable, that means you're learning, you're growing for something to happen in the future. and you're not fully being present right now. And the thing I love about your uncertainty concept, it gets me thinking about just trust the work and get up, and every day you'll be a little bit uncomfortable. You can't predict with certainty what's going to happen, as you said.
Yeah.
I love that. I think it'll help our listeners and myself to a degree be more present and enjoy the journey. I mean, that really is all we have right now.
It is. It is. And I think it's a journey we're all on, whether we like it or not. A lot of this work is built around and inspired by Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, if you've read any of his work. But basically, he looked at all the origin stories and all the religions from all around the world, and he found that there was a common narrative amongst all of them. He called it the monomyth, or we know it now as the hero's journey. And it's inspired a lot of great movies and books and songs and stories and everything. I think famously the Star Wars is built around that kind of storytelling structural model. But I think more deeply it's the essence of what human growth looks like for all of us. We're all going to be forced into we can step into the unknown intentionally, or we can be forced into it. Again, that's the idea of hunting discomfort. It's going to hunt you. We move into the unknown. We learn new things about ourselves and the world. We find people that support us and connect with us on the way. And we emerge with gifts, not only for ourselves, but that we can share with the world. And I think the more that we can practice that intentionally, the more powerful, the more impactful, the more value creation that we're producing for ourselves, our families, communities, and really the world.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody wants to make a difference. One of the things I hear a lot is, well, I'm just one person. What can I really do? And a number of folks, they won't even vote because of that. And I think about it and go, you know what? If you change one life for the better, you add some value there. That's amazing. What if you did 2 in a year? That's amazing. What if everybody did that, going forward? What's your advice for listeners on having an impact? It doesn't have to be a global impact.
No. Well, I think we can never see the impact of just having a one-on-one conversation. Something simple. This conversation, buying a coffee for the person in front of you, telling your significant other how you feel about them in a meaningful way. The ripple effects of that stuff, we will never see the end of. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond and all those ripples go out from there. And I think it goes back to what you said in the beginning of trusting. Trust in the work, trust in your presence, finding a trust in ourselves, and really doing what we're doing with all that we are, really bringing our heart forward, being present, impacting people in ways that we believe are aligned with our higher purpose. And the ripple effect will be profound.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from our discussion and reading your book is appreciating, understanding, and accepting this uncertainty part of it. And it's helping me even get deeper in being more comfortable just trusting that it'll work out as long as I lean in and do the work. In this conversation, yes. Was there one thing that was a big takeaway for you so far?
To me, well, you said it. It's that thing my mom used to say, which is the way out is through. Like I have that phrase posted up on my wall. I think about it every day. And yet when I hear somebody else say it, like yourself, I'm like, yeah, the way out is through. Like, what is it that I'm avoiding, denying, or surviving that is my opportunity? And just being on the lookout for that, I think is something that helps me every single day. So thanks for sharing that one.
Absolutely. I think we're reinforcing the wrong direction with the best of intentions. When somebody says up anything, hey, a little bit of struggle over here. Oh, you poor thing. I'm so sorry. No. How did you leverage that to create more value in the world, right? Because all struggle can be leveraged to create value. Look what you've done through your struggle. You're impacting hundreds of thousands of people in the world in a positive way. And for sure, it's emotional energy value creation in the biggest sense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think a lot of times businesses have gotten preoccupied with this idea of growing the zone within business where people can feel psychologically safe. Don't offend anybody. Don't say the wrong thing. Don't have too much of a dispute about your perspectives or what people are working on. And I do think there's a time and a place for that. But I think that if it's exclusively done, absolves us of our own responsibility, which is growing the zone within which we feel psychologically safe. Not circumstantially safe, but we find that really that trust within ourselves. And I think if as leaders in a business, in a family, in a community, as we can create harmony between those two things, making sure people feel safe and seen and supported, and giving them the tools to be able to confront some of the hard challenges, hard truths themselves, then I think growth is all but inevitable.
I love that. And I think, at least for me, I've got a really strong personality, and I learned a long time ago I can run people over. I can be so right on long and I don't get the result. So I've kind of learned to identify where somebody's at in terms of the level of uncomfortableness or conversation they can have, and then just inch it forward a little bit faster. Any thoughts on from your view how to work better to cultivate this ability in others without going so hard they get uncomfortable to too large of a degree?
Yeah. So to me, I think a really great tool is calling out the elephant in the room. Saying the thing that everybody's thinking, but oftentimes aren't saying, which might be talking about something uncomfortable, but then stepping back a little and say, hey, this is a really uncomfortable conversation. Like, are you okay with this conversation? Should we dial it back? Can we push forward? Do you want to pick it up some other time? And in reorienting ourselves and others to discomfort's not something to shy away from. It's the path forward. So how can we do that together in a way that's really going to be productive? And oftentimes it's from saying the thing, of taking it out of the unsaid, taking it out of the unknown and saying, hey, yeah, this is uncomfortable. Or I'm not quite sure how to do this. Or, hey, I'm sorry, I messed this up. Can you help me? It's saying that thing that helps soften the blow of that discomfort just a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. Sterling, if our listeners want to learn more about what you're doing, where can they go?
Yeah, thank you. So all the information about myself, the book, the No Matter What community is all at sterlinghawkins.com. So thanks for that. And fantastic conversation today. Really appreciate you and all the work you're doing.
Thank you. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm looking forward to talking again soon.
I hope so. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast, where we explore the art of value creation. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and leave a review. And until next time, show the world your value.